Let's get right into it. We have another mass shooting on our hands, this one at the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, California. Shooters targeted a party for employees of the San Bernardino County Department of Public Health. There was a meeting, some kind of a party, a gathering held in an auditorium with at least 100 people. The shooters fled in an SUV after killing 14 and injuring 18 people. The two perpetrators are believed to be Syed Farook and his wife, Tashfeen Malik. They were ultimately killed by police after an exchange of gunfire with the occupants of the SUV. Farook was at this party that I mentioned as an employee. This was the second deadliest mass shooting in California's history. What is the deal with Syed Farook? An inspector for the San Bernardino County Department of Public Health. He was reportedly in attendance at just as a Christmas party attendee. Co-workers reported that he had been quiet during the early parts of the event. People noticed that he had left the party sort of abruptly, leaving his coat right before a group photo was taken. And there were a couple of reports that he was involved in some kind of argument right before his departure. A minute before 11 a.m. Pacific time yesterday, two perpetrators, believed to be Farook and his wife, showed back up wearing ski masks and camouflage, and they opened fire on the partygoers. Witnesses allegedly recognized Farook at that time as one of the shooters based on his voice and his build. And officials stressed that the attack was almost certainly not a reaction to that argument. So there's this report, Lewis, that Farook had been involved in an argument, left and came back shooting. What we are hearing now, and again, we're at almost 24 hours after the event, but still a lot of this information is somewhat preliminary. It appears that whether or not that argument triggered the shooting happening then and there, there's every indication that this was pre-planned to a greater extent than just saying, oh, I got into an argument, I'm coming back with my wife, guns blazing.
Yeah, no doubt. With their equipment, the camouflage, the pipe bombs, as we'll talk about,
Right.
they were clearly planning for something. Whether or not it was going to be that day, we may never know.
And the shootout that ultimately happened with police was when the SUV was stopped just under 2 miles from the original location of this shooting. There was an exchange during which Farook and his wife were reportedly throwing things out the window, reportedly wearing what some described as body armor, and we still do not have all the facts. Now, immediately, because of the tensions that are going on, the question started about, is this radical Muslim terrorism? Is this a disgruntled employee who planned this in advance? What is the situation here? What we know now is that Farook was a 28-year-old man born in the United States to parents who came to the U.S. from Pakistan. He had worked as a food inspector for the San Bernardino County Department of Public Health for the last 5 years. And here is where things get really tricky. On the one hand, we have been told by Farook's father and coworkers that Farook was a, quote, devout Muslim. At the same time, the fact that a mass shooter was a devout Muslim doesn't prove that the motivation was Muslim jihad. Even Sam Harris, who is often criticized, Lewis, as a sort of Islamophobe who just wants to blame Islam for anything, said, Muslims can go postal too, and we need to wait for the evidence. The other confounding factors we have so far are that this was a relatively newly married couple, no FBI profile that we know of, no social media profile, no interactions with law enforcement. They have a 6-month-old rather baby, and they specifically made plans for the baby to be left, I believe it's with a family member, during the time that this shooting took place. So a lot of questions here. We don't yet know what the reality is, but what we do know, Lewis, and Mark wrote to me about this, is that these attacks will likely be used to try to help the Republican Party win in 2016. The San Bernardino attack was not perpetrated by a white Christian. That we know. Whether radical Islam was or wasn't the motivation for this particular shooting, we know based on the identity politics that are going to be played that this is going to be used by the right. And Mark's concern is that if we have a couple more of these shootings, regardless of the motivations, that it could very well help Republicans win using the traditional fear mongering that we hear from them.
Yeah, you prey on people's fears, and they may that may resonate with them and they may vote Republican. We're on the other end of it, right? We think that a Republican is probably the wrong person to hire in this situation because we see the gun control component.
Right.
And we think, okay, maybe we need someone who will impose stricter laws having to do with that. So it goes both ways, I think.
And President Obama, again, feels like the 10th, 12th, 15th time that there's a shooting and he comes out and he says, our thoughts and prayers are with the families, as we always hear. But President Obama also added, quote, there are some steps we could take, not to eliminate every one of these mass shootings, but to improve the odds that they don't happen as frequently. Common sense gun safety laws, stronger background checks, etc. And of course, the pro-gun right says, oh, President Obama's being political. He's making this political. This is political. There's no denying that this is political. And it's an issue that our politicians, specifically, primarily the politicians on the right, are preventing us from solving.
Yeah. The question is, will Republicans, will the gun nuts ever get tired or weary of hearing about mass shootings? Or every time they hear one, does it strengthen their belief that everyone needs more guns?
Because if everybody had guns all the time, then nobody would ever shoot somebody else because of the fear that all the good guys with the guns would immediately shoot them down. We've debunked that so many times. I mean, at this point, it's laughable to even try to push that narrative. And we have to remember in this particular case, there was a bystander with a gun within yards of the shooting. His name is Glenn Wilworth. He owns a paper company across the street from the Inland Regional Center. He says that he grabbed his .45 caliber handgun and walked over there. He took position behind a water truck that was refilling a fire hydrant. But he said, even though I felt like I was able to pretty accurately target the shooter, I chose not to fire because it was just utter chaos. And then in an interview with the Boston Herald, he said, I wasn't going to travel onto their property to get involved, but I went up to the edge of it, and that was as close as I really needed to be getting to the whole situation. If they came at me, it would have been a different story. So again, Lewis, someone with a gun, close enough to take action, choosing not to, and it was probably the right decision because who knows how many more innocent people would have been killed by this supposed good guy with a gun.
Yeah, I mean, in a situation like that, the what ifs could go on forever. You could play the what if game.
Yeah.
But Dave, anyone who's committing a mass shooting like this is ready to die.
Right, absolutely.
They know they're going to die.
And they did.
Yeah, and so getting shot and killed is not a deterrent at all. And they are always going to have the element of surprise, and that's huge.
Well, I guess the idea is even if they're willing to die, if there's enough good guys with guns, they can die before killing a whole bunch of people instead of after. That's the sort of fantasy world idea. But statistics and data tell us that this is an incredibly unlikely scenario.
Yes, it's not usually how it works out in the real world. In the movies, Dave, it seems to work all the time, but not so much in reality.